I can't stop talking about construction. I've got construction mania, but that's actually not what we're talking about this week. I just figured I'd mention it because it's just everywhere you look, there's construction going on in the parks right now. It's insane. The reason I mention it, though, is because during my last trip to Walt Disney World, I walked around what remains of Dino Land. Chester and Hester's Dino-Rama is done for. It's surrounded by walls, and they're starting to remove some of the attractions. Dinosaur is still open, and Restaurantosaurus is still open and operating, but the rest is pretty much done. And this got me thinking, a lot of people were upset about Dinosaur closing, but I haven't seen a lot of people truly upset that Dino-Rama is closing. Yeah, they're gonna miss it. Yes, people are nostalgic for Dino-Rama, but a lot of people are actually pretty positive about Encanto and Tropical Americas moving in and replacing this. And that got me thinking even more. What did Dino Land do wrong? What did Chester and Hester's Dino-Rama specifically do wrong? That, my friends, is the topic of today's video. The illusion of theming. The lack of theming being pushed as a theme. Now, I'll explain more as we get into the video, obviously, but you can see this on both coasts, Walt Disney World and Disneyland, even across the sea over at Disneyland Paris with Walt Disney Studios Park. The lack of theming as a theme was very, very prevalent and pronounced toward the end of Michael Eisner's era at Disney, and it's a big problem that Disney seems to be sort of working to rectify now, as we speak. Like I said, with all the construction. Now, what I mean by the lack of theming as a theme is when Disney doesn't want to spend, too much money doing rock work and planting a bunch of new plants like they did with, say, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, so they'll instead build some industrial buildings and then pass that off as the theming. The theme of the land is an industrial building, and it just now occurred to me that I'm talking about and showing footage of Avengers Campus. Yes, so they still do this. Okay, I'm not saying that this is a thing of the past. Disney does do it. It's just less pronounced than it used to be. You see, back when Disney was building parks like Disney California Adventure and Walt Disney Studios over in Paris, they weren't working with, to put it gently, the same sort of creative gumption that they're working with now. And I know that sounds crazy. Like with MGM Studios, the goal wasn't to transport you into these different movie worlds, it was to show you how these worlds were made. But when the park opened, it only had two attractions, the Backlot Tour and the Great Movie Ride, neither of which are there today. Now, why is that? It's because Disney was sort of rushing to get MGM Studios finished and open by the time that Universal Studios Orlando would also be opening. They wanted to compete with Universal. Not quite the same these days, but that's for a different video. And so you did have really good touches of theming here and there, like the Pan-Pacific Amphitheater and Hollywood Boulevard serving as the sort of Main Street USA to the land. It was all themed after the golden age of Hollywood that never actually existed. But the further you would venture into MGM Studios, the less theming you would encounter. The Backlot Tour wasn't really themed at all. It was supposed to be themed after a backlot, so I guess it made sense having exposed pipes and concrete everywhere. And then when Sunset Boulevard opened with the Tower of Terror, that was also very lightly themed, similar to Hollywood Boulevard. The theming was California landmarks, and while it looked cool, it's not fantastical. It's not like, say, Main Street USA. It's certainly no Fantasy Springs, and that's not a problem. Like I said, there are some areas where light theming is appropriate and it works. But then you run into the problem of the backlot at Disney California Adventure. This isn't themed at all. This is just a giant warehouse. It's not meant to look like old Hollywood. It's not meant to look like anything except for a Hollywood soundstage, and I guess it really kind of does look like a soundstage. And that is why it is one of my least favorite areas of the park, one of my least favorite areas of the Disneyland Resort, and it's where I'm hoping that Disney puts the Avatar land that they're going to build, because look at the theming here versus the theming here. One of these is clearly superior, and it's not even a matter of taste. This one obviously takes a lot more work. Now, I briefly mentioned why MGM Studios was built on this sort of very quick timeline, and not necessarily a shoestring budget, but definitely a smaller budget than parks like Magic Kingdom and Epcot. Disney California Adventure and Walt Disney Studios Park in Paris, now I believe renamed to Disney Adventure World, are the two main parks where you can feel a tighter budget and a very quick timeline. In the case of California Adventure, Disney knew that they wanted a second park at the Disneyland Resort in Anaheim, California, and then after going through many many different proposals, they went with a sort of spiritual successor to MGM, now Hollywood Studios, and based the park around not only movie making and stepping into the creation of your favorite Disney films, but also the entire state around it. It would be Disney's California Adventure, not just Disney's Hollywood Studios, it'd be the whole state this time. Construction began on California Adventure on January 22nd, 1998, and it would open just 3 years later in February of 2001. They had 3 years, and it turned out, And while that might seem quick, Disney parks usually take about on average 3 years to build. Magic Kingdom took 4, that's a bit of an outlier, but Epcot, Animal Kingdom, Tokyo Disneyland, and of course DCA all took about 3 years to construct. Disneyland only took them 1 year, but as we all know, safety regulations were less of a thing in the 50s, and we don't talk about opening day of Disneyland. That was a mess. That should really put into perspective things like World Celebration, part of a park, not even an entire Disney theme park, or Tron at the Magic Kingdom. Galaxy's Edge themselves, both of the lands at Hollywood Studios and Disneyland, both also took just 3 years to build. So you can see that they can do incredible things on the same timeline, that they can do very rushed and, sort of cheap things. And while all these parks are sort of finding their footing nowadays, back when they first opened, they all sort of faced the exact same criticism. It wasn't really the Disney magic that people were looking for. California Adventure specifically really just wasn't impressing people. Which brings me to today. Now, Disney is trying to undo the mistakes of the past. They are trying to add more themed elements, more fantastical elements into these originally lightly themed parks. You can see it especially over at Disney Adventure World with a giant expansion near the back end of the park, adding properties like the world of Frozen and the Pride Lands from The Lion King. And at California Adventure, the transformation started even earlier. And now, as weird as it may sound to say today, Bob Iger spearheaded the effort to make DCA more Disney with the opening of Cars Land and Buena Vista Street. Now these areas were themed. Now, Buena Vista Street, it was themed in a very similar way to Sunset Boulevard and Hollywood Boulevard over at Hollywood Studios, but it was vastly better than what came before with the Sunshine Plaza. Sunshine Plaza just looked really cheap. It was supposed to feel kind of cheap. It was meant to be like a postcard come to life, and while I know a lot of people have a soft spot for old DCA, I know you might like it, but it wasn't great. Buena Vista Street is absolutely an improvement. So very slowly, very carefully, Disney is making their way through all of these older parks and changing up the vibes. Like at Hollywood Studios, we got Galaxy's Edge, we're getting Monsters, Inc. Pandora, hopefully at Disney California Adventure. For a while there, things were looking up. But moving backward a little bit, we got the announcement of Avengers Campus. And at first, it looked pretty good. I gotta admit, I loved Marvel back at the time. I still kinda like Marvel. And it was very exciting to see what Disney would do with these MCU-ish characters at Disneyland in one of their parks for the very first time. And we kind of just got more of what made DCA 1.0 sort of lackluster. Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout is the only exception to this rule, and even then it's sort of still industrial, just a little bit in the queue, but the theming is pretty solid over there. The rest of Avengers Campus, Avengers HQ proper, is buildings and warehouses. The theme is that there is no theme. And that, alongside the apparent lack of shade, it's really sunny and it's really hot in Avengers Campus, was a lot of people's problem with this new land. And then most people don't like web slingers. I don't know why. It's so much better than Toy Story Midway Mania, but I get it. We expected something better for Spider-Man. I hope we get something better for Spider-Man at some point. And so if you look at all the lands Disney has opened recently, in recent memory, Galaxy's Edge, New Toontown, dare I say even World Celebration, Avengers Campus sort of falls flat. And while I like it, I just don't really love it like I do other lands. And part of me is worried that they're going to have to retrace their steps, going back 10, 15, 20 years in the future and redoing these areas of Avengers Campus to make them more timeless. And that's what I think the problem is. It works for lands like Main Street USA and New Orleans Square and even Frontierland. They are meant to replicate just architecture of the time. However, those are set in the past, a place where we can't really get to. That's why Sunset and Hollywood Boulevard are better. But when something is meant to replicate the present, MGM MGM Studios backlot tour, the backlot at California Adventure, basically all of Adventure World formerly. That gets aged out very, very quickly. It's like a sort of side branch off of the Tomorrowland problem. You can't have a futuristic Tomorrowland because the future is always on its way. Maybe not so much these days, but back then, absolutely. So in order to make Tomorrowland seem futuristic forever, you have to set it in a fantastical, sort of imaginary version of the future and not a grounded, realistic version. That's why Epcot was changed. Future World became World Celebration, Nature, and Discovery, because it's easier to celebrate, explore, and visit nature than it is to envision an accurate picture of the future that will be evergreen. If you ever rode the backlot tour at MGM/Hollywood Studios, you know that it sort of felt like being transported back in time to the 90s. Avengers Campus is very much like 2015 through 2019 sleek Apple Store designs, and World Celebration is designed to look very modern. But the problem is, in 10 or 20 years down the road, it's not going to look modern, it's going to look dated. Same with Avengers Campus. And if the MCU is still going in 2045, what's it going to look like then? It might be completely unrecognizable from the Avengers Age of Ultron, Endgame, Infinity War era that Avengers Campus is designed around. So they're going to have to go back and sort of reimagine the land. However, if they had gone with something more fantastical, something that was more fictional than the Avengers Campus that we got, maybe a Wakanda, maybe a Sanctum Sanctorum. The Sanctum Sanctorum is both timeless and mystical. It's an old brownstone building in New York that's the home of one of the most powerful wizards in the multiverse. You could do a lot of Mystic Manor, Haunted Mansion style things in that sort of building or theme. What would you rather explore? This or this? And that's also why the ancient sanctum area of Avengers Campus is my favorite. It just feels so mystical, so timeless. It's great. Now, while I think Avengers Campus is the most egregious example of this, it does exist in other places, like specifically Communicore Hall and the Spaceship Earth Lounge, oddly enough, at Epcot. That's also not gonna be super futuristic or Epcot-y in 10 or so years. So save the money and do something weird and out there the first time, rather than having to refresh some of these lands a couple of years down the road. And now that I've spent probably about, 11 and a half minutes talking about how lackluster these lands and expansions can be, I do want to take a moment to talk about how it takes a certain amount of care to put these together. Even though they might not age particularly well, Disney is still building a representation of reality in these theme parks. I saw this recently on Blue Sky that reminded me that, even though something looks like it's really, really cheap, it can take a lot of work to make. The pavement at Dinoland. The asphalt, I should say more specifically, is not your average everyday asphalt that they use to build roads. As you might remember, people's heels were sinking into the asphalt on the opening day of Disneyland in 1955. So Disney would have to go a different direction for Dinoland. So they had to lay down chicken wire and pour concrete and then pull the chicken wire out as the concrete was drying and then sculpt all of the cracks in the asphalt. This is meticulously made. It took a lot of work to make Dinoland look this cheap, and that's what I think is really sad. All of these talented artists put their all into this sort of sculpting of a busted up old road, and it looks so accurate to the real thing. The real thing isn't very impressive. The real thing is just sort of what we see every day. And so now we're getting tropical Americas instead of Dinoland, something far more exotic, somewhere we don't see or visit every day, with architecture and attractions inspired by things that are completely unique to that part of the world. Say what you will about Dinoland. I absolutely love Dinosaur. I think it's one of the funnest attractions at all of Walt Disney World. Tropical Americas will probably age far better. Man, the Tomorrowland problem really just sticking its head in everything these days. You can't go anywhere without talking about the Tomorrowland problem. It's absolutely everywhere. No people mover in Tropical Americas, though, unless you count the carousel, which, I mean, you could if we wanted to get really specific, but it's just another case that we've seen time after time after time of Disney coming in and having to sprinkle some pixie dust over an area that didn't really have any before. Are they going to continue to do this? I guess we'll wait until the Avengers Campus revamp is announced at D23 2030. I'll be there. I'll be sat and ready to go. I mean, you never know. Maybe they'll build a people mover there. Lord knows they don't want to do it in Tomorrowland. So yeah, it's a complicated issue. We've seen it work before, but we've seen it fail more times than we've seen it work. And the lack of theming as theming is a problem that Disney continues to run into, while Universal, meanwhile, is sort of moving away from that. I never really had interest in visiting Universal Studios, either of them, before Harry Potter and Super Nintendo World opened, because this looks way more fun and exciting than this. And now we have Universal, like Disney, moving away from the lack of theming as theming, moving away from the making of movies as a theme, moving into these more immersive, highly themed environments that we see with Epic Universe. And boy, do I want to go to Epic Universe. The Donkey Kong roller coaster, the Universal Monsters Land, How to Train Your Dragon. If they're blasting Test Drive on that How to Train Your Dragon roller coaster, ooh, I'm going to be there all day. You'll know where to find me. And Disney, you used to be the leader in the theme park space. You still, by the numbers, are, by a lot. You gotta show us why, with places like Pandora, with places like Monstropolis. While, yeah, it's still kind of modern, it's a city inhabited by monsters and everything is a monster pun. World Celebration, everything behind Spaceship Earth was kind of a misstep. The foliage and the plants are great, but you need to go crazy. You need to get weird. Make a building that is club cool, but is also a kinetic sculpture. You know what I mean? You gotta get weird. Give Living with the Land a drop or even a loop-de-loop, you know? Get crazy. Okay, maybe not the second one, but they could consider it. But now, my friends, I'm going to turn the question over to you. What do you think of the lack of theming as a theme? That's sort of what I've been calling it throughout this video. Did it work for you in the past? Were you a fan of the backlot at California Adventure or the backlot tour at MGM/Hollywood Studios? Did that not really ever bother you? Or is it as jarring for you as it is for me walking from Grizzly Peak to Buena Vista Street to the backlot at California Adventure? It's very jarring. There's nothing back there. Please be sure to let me know down in the comments below, because there are some redeeming qualities to it. Old Innoventions was modern in the 80s, but then, you know, when you stepped into it the year before they decided to tear it down for World Celebration, it felt like stepping back in time to the 80s. It felt like it was themed after an abandoned shopping mall. And there's some appeal to that, but maybe that's just me liking my niche things. I don't think the average park guest would pick up on that. I don't think they would like it. A little bit of a rant video, I know, and I don't want people to get the wrong idea. I didn't hate the backlot tour. I don't hate the backlot at DCA. Well, I actually kind of do hate the backlot at DCA, but there are times when it can work. It just could be a lot better. You know what I'm saying? But you know what ride's relatively unthemed and is really good and could never get better? That's right, Living with the Land. You know, I don't know. Would you consider Greenhouse a theme? Because in that case, absolutely, it's very, very heavily themed. Hello everybody, thank you all so much for watching this week's video. If you couldn't, pick up on it, I put some Easter eggs in this video sprinkled throughout, hinting toward what next week's video is going to be about, and I'm very, very excited to truly be living with the land with you all about this time next week. However, if you did like this video, the one that you're watching right now, please be sure to hit the like button, and if you're new around here and you want more videos, more rants like this, please hit the subscribe button. A very special thank you, of course, as always, to my supporters over at patreon.com/offhanddisney. They get early access to videos and exclusive access to some Living with the Land themed videos I'm working on currently as we speak. A little bit more behind the scenes than behind the scenes, if you know what I'm saying. If you want to join their ranks and get access to these behind the scenes videos, even just $1 a month will get you access to most of the perks. You can see their names scrolling by right now as we speak. These are all of my wonderful Patreons. Patrons? I don't know, still unsure on what to call them. However, if you would rather follow me just for free, without spending any money, you can follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. I am at Offhand Disney on all of those websites. But I believe that about wraps it up, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I very much look forward to speaking with you all in person next week in next week's video, where we may or may not be living with the land. We shall see. Goodbye.